It feels like just yesterday that we were talking about the last Necron Army of Renown for Warhammer 40k that was leaked a little bit ahead of its actual release date, that being the Annihilation Legion. But now, just a couple weeks later, we have another Necron Army of Renown being spoiled all over the internet. This is the Cult of the Cryptek, a Cryptek and Canoptek focused Army of Renown, to contrast with that more Destroyer and Flayed One focused Legion of Annihilation. And this one looks pretty cool. So let's dive into the Cult of the Cryptek and talk about all the wacky stuff that Necrons are going to be able to do with this upcoming release. Now, for those who don't know, an Army of Renown in Warhammer 40k is a special type of themed army that you can play instead of playing a normal force. This imposes additional list building restrictions on you on top of the normal requirements, but you do get some additional benefits. Usually your units will get a special ability, and you'll get access to a new set of Warlord traits and relics to use in addition to the ones that you'll get normally from your codex. In this case, the Cult of the Cryptek Army of Renown requires you to only bring Cryptek, Canoptek, Necron warriors, and Convergence of Dominion units in your army, and has the requirement that your entire army be drawn from the same dynasty. Importantly, this means that while there are special character Crypteks in the game, they will actually not be usable in this Army of Renown because they're dynastic agents and therefore do not have a dynasty keyword. So for all you Chad, Orican, the Diviner, and Illuminor Saraz enjoyers out there, unfortunately, those two will not be eligible to be played in the Cult of the Cryptek. Importantly, this gives your army the Tomb Guardians ability, which gives them +1 attack and rerolls of 1 on their reanimation protocols roll instead of a normal dynastic code. Now, unlike the Annihilation Legion, this doesn't have any replacement or modifiers to the command protocols ability, so your army will still benefit from command protocols as normal. The other benefits you get in exchange for imposing these restrictions on yourself are access to some incredible stratagems and Warlord traits. In my opinion, the Warlord traits are really the highlight here. We have Master of the Cult, that chooses a unit within 9 in the command phase and gives it +1 to hit. Curator of Deadly Curiosities, which gives +1 strength, AP, and damage to one weapon that the Warlord is carrying. Now, importantly, I did take a look through some FAQs, mostly a cursory glance, and I didn't see a mention that a weapon with multiple attack profiles, both melee and ranged attacks, would count as 2 separate weapons for this, although I do seem to remember something about that being ruled in the Space Marine Codex. I couldn't find it when I was looking through, so it may be in there, but it seems to me, to my reading at least right now, that you may be able to apply these benefits to both the melee and ranged profiles of, for example, a staff that one of your Crypteks is carrying. Codifier of Lesser Beings gives 1 unit within 6 inches of you +1 to wound against 1 visible enemy that you choose in your command phase. Fluid Necrodermis allows the Warlord to ignore movement modifiers and ignore 1 failed saving throw each turn, kind of a impossible robe effect. Conductor of Legions gives 1 unit within 9 inches chosen in the command phase the ability to perform ranged attacks and actions. And Infomonger,
turn the friggin' frogs gay,
allows 1 unit within 6 inches to get both directives of an active command protocol.
What do you think tap water is? It's a gay bomb, baby.
I think the real highlights here are Master of the Cult for +1 to hit, especially since Canoptek units, which the army is mostly going to be composed of, don't typically have the best attack profiles. They're usually weapon skill and ballistic skill 4, so having a cheeky +1 to hit to throw in there is very good, but you can also use that to ape a My Will Be Done that you would normally get from your nobles on a large unit like Necron warriors. The +1 to wound against a visible enemy unit is also very good, although it's important to note that that is kind of difficult to trigger since you have to have line of sight to the target of the effect in the start of your turn, meaning it's mostly used defensively. When your opponent comes out to attack you, you're going to get +1 to wound against that unit that's up in the grill of your army. Importantly, both of these effects affect both ranged and melee attacks. Not only can you be shooting at people with all of these benefits, but you can also affect your units in melee. And that's going to be very important because obviously you're getting +1 attack, and there are some stratagems that are going to wombo combo with some Necron units for absolutely massive damage in melee. Speaking of which, let's move on and talk about some stratagems. Overkill Protocols improves wraiths based on the weapons that they're carrying, +1 AP for their claws, or +1 hit roll with their whips. Now this is worded a little funky, so let's talk about exactly what that means, specifically with the whip coils. Whip coils are a doubling weapon, so every attack that you make with them splits that attack into 2 separate hit rolls. After that splitting occurs, those hit rolls are basically each treated as an individual attack, essentially doubling your attacks with each swing that you put into using your whip coils. Now, importantly, this gives you an additional hit roll for each attack that you're making. So instead of doubling your attacks, you're now tripling them. And from a Necron Wraith that's making a base of 5 attacks, because they have a base characteristic of 4 attacks, plus 1 from the benefit of the Army of Renown, that means that each individual Wraith is going to be making 15 swings with their whip coils as long as this stratagem is active. Stalking Annihilator allows a Doomstalker that moved normally to fire as if it were stationary. Aggression Overrides allows Canoptek Tomb Spiders to get +2 movement and hit on 2s in melee. Pretty good for a unit that you may already be taking in order to fuel your Scarab bricks. Speaking of Scarabs, the Swarm Descends allows Scarab Swarms to deep strike. This one's not quite as exciting though, because Scarab Swarms, I don't know, aren't the greatest and most scary deep striking unit. Exalted Cryptek allows one Cryptek to hold multiple pieces of Arcana. This may introduce some interesting combinations for some of the more aggressive Cryptek Arcana that you don't typically see, especially in conjunction with Warlord traits like the Fluid Necrodermis that makes that Cryptek harder to kill. Canoptek Overdrive allows Wraiths to fight on death, very much cementing the Wraith focus of this Army of Renown. Hyperdense Particle Beams gives +2 AP on Particle Beamers or Casters. These are typically AP 0 weapons, so that +2 AP is going to be a very big deal, especially with how high volume they are. Last but certainly not least, Enhanced Gloom Prism gives +2 to deny the Witch rolls if you're using a Gloom Prism to deny. Importantly, since there's no Silent King, because he is a special character and not a Cryptek, this army has no other way to interact with Psychers besides Gloom Prisms, so having this with the ability to get +2 to stop things like Psychic Interrogation or Warp Ritual is a very big deal for getting up on the secondary game. The last thing that this Army of Renown unlocks for you is some additional Cryptek Arcana. These are special chapter command style upgrades that you pay points for to grant your Cryptek another special ability. And with that Exalted Cryptek stratagem, you can potentially give one of your Crypteks 2 of these special Arcana. Now, these are in addition to the Arcana in the core Necron book, which include important synergy pieces like the failsafe Overcharger that can give your Wraiths an additional attack. So we can potentially be swinging those Wraiths 18 times. Seems pretty good. These Cryptek Arcana include the Atomizer Stave, which doubles the effectiveness of a Plasmancer's Harbinger of Destruction ability, the Oracular Mantle for Technomancers that allows them to give the ability to ignore cover to a unit within 6, Auto Diviner, which gives you a command point on a 5+ at the start of each of your command phases, Entropic Chrono Shackle, which prevents units from falling back within 12 inches on the roll of a 4+, the Neutron Shroud, which is an Armor Indomitus style ability, giving the bearer a 2+ armor save and a once per game 3+ invulnerable save until the end of a phase, and the Obedience Nanoscarabs, which allows the Psychomancer to use its Harbinger of Despair ability twice instead of just once. Now, as I mentioned before, I think the ability to stack multiple of these Arcana onto a single character and use some potential relics or warlord traits to make them more difficult to kill does mean that you can create some aggressive versions of these Crypteks that you couldn't normally. Being able to stack effects like counter-temporal nanomines to reduce the movement and potential charge of enemies coming into you, alongside the Crypto-Geometric Adjuster to give an enemy within 12 inches -1 to hit, means that you can play your Crypteks a little bit far forward and make use of multiple of those special abilities. Otherwise, I think the big headliner here is that ability for +1 attack. As we were talking about before, we can get Wraiths up to a potential 18 attack just by using Arcana and the abilities out of this Army of Renown, but that also stacks pretty well with other attack modifying abilities and stratagems. We talked about the failsafe Overcharger already, but we can use Blood Rights if we are in the Novak Dynasty. We won't get the dynastic code, but we will unlock their stratagems. So we can use that stratagem for +1 attack alongside something like Disruption Fields for +1 strength, since obviously all that stuff is now core thanks to the recent data slate updates. That stacks Canoptek Wraiths up to a massive 7 attacks apiece, which if we're using the Overkill Protocol stratagem, then triples their attacks thanks to their whip coils, meaning that we're attacking 21 times, potentially with +1 strength, +1 to hit, and +1 to wound. Especially in a situation where your opponent is reducing damage by 1, being able to just swing 100 times with a unit of Wraiths allows you to get through that damage reduction pretty well. Although obviously those guys are going to be relatively low AP, which can have some problems. I'm sure there's a lot of wombo combos out here that dedicated Necron players in the community are going to be able to put together. I think this Army of Renown is really sick. because just like the Legion of Annihilation beforehand, obviously I don't think it's going to be quite as powerful as the Obsac Dynasty that we typically see played competitively, where everything in the Necron army gets objective secured and a pregame move, allowing them to score their secondaries really easily. I do think that both of these armies of Renown give some relatively competitive alternative ways for Necron armies to play. This is going to be able to break the faction away from their normal Silent King plus a bunch of Obsec bodies build that we've been seeing for the last 6 months or so, and allow the faction to really flourish. And honestly, I think this is really how armies of Renown should be used. I don't like the armies of Renown that come out and immediately become the only way that an army can be played, and I also don't like the ones that come out and are totally unplayable. And I think that these two Necron armies of Renown probably, herald the best case scenario for the army of Renown mechanic. I was a little bit worried that we would end up getting a swath of armies like Crusher Stampede that basically supersede any other way of playing that the army could have. And instead we're seeing armies of Renown that are not the best thing ever, relatively competitive, but also just give you a swath of new options. I'm absolutely terrified at the number of attacks that these Canoptek units can make, and also with Crypteks and Canopteks all together, we have multiple ways to use heroic interventions and fight phase manipulation, meaning that this army is, I think, going to be pretty lethal in the fight phase and have some trickery up its sleeve for the shooting phase as well. Overall, pretty happy with this army Renown, but I'm interested to hear what you have to say, so let me know down in the comments what you think about the Cult of the Cryptek, and if you're a Necron player, if you're going to be putting it on the table anytime soon. And with that, I think we'll wrap up this quick review here. Thanks everyone for watching. Remember to keep it classy, folks. Have happy wargaming, and big thanks to everyone who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All you people are great. I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.